Good evening. Welcome. I'm Hannah Weissman, Executive Director of the Magnus Collection of Jewish Art and Life, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all tonight. If you're new to the Magnus, we're a museum dedicated to generating new knowledge and understanding of Jewish cultures, which we do primarily through the exceptional collection in our care. In 2014, the Magnus's exhibition Gourmet Ghettos, Modern Food Rituals explored connections between food, ritual, identity, and activism that inform Jewish life. You can view a selection of objects from that exhibition in time capsules. They're on your left as you walk back towards the lobby. Tonight, we have the opportunity to contextualize those tangible objects that are in our care with stories and recipes to deepen our understanding of culture. The Magnus is a big tent where our principles of community call for us to affirm the dignity of all individuals, to ensure freedom of expression and dialogue that elicits the full spectrum of views held by our communities, to respect the differences as well as the commonalities that bring us together, and to call for civility and respect in our personal interactions. We ask you to uphold these principles tonight and every time you visit the Magnus, and thank you for being part of our community. It's now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Professor of Latin American Literature and Culture, Estelle Tarica, whose research and teaching examines colonial legacies in modern Latin America, indigenous and Jewish memory cultures, and the transformative power of narrative and poetry. She'll introduce our program and our distinguished guests this evening.
Thank you, Hannah, and welcome to everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here to introduce Professor Margaret Boyle and Professor Ilan Stavans, and to introduce this event about this amazing book, Sabor Judío, the Jewish-Mexican cookbook. Professor Boyle is Professor of Romance, Languages, and Literatures and Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx Studies at Bowdoin College. She's a specialist in Hispanic women's literary and cultural history, in the history of comedia performance, and in the health humanities, which includes medical, spiritual, and food cultures. She's the author of a prize-winning monograph called Unruly Women, Performance, Penitence, and Punishment in Early Modern Spain that appeared in 2014. She's written dozens of articles on Spanish Renaissance theater, and her work has appeared in numerous journals and edited volumes. She also co-edited in 2021 a book on health and healing in the early modern Iberian world from a gendered perspective. Professor Boyle is also the director of Multilingual Mainers referring to the state of Maine, which is a program that provides age-appropriate tools to combat xenophobia, racism, and intolerance through engagement with languages other than English. Professor Boyle has received numerous awards, including from the Fulbright Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and she collaborated with Professor Stavans on this book, a story of how they came together. I hope maybe we'll find out. So let me tell you a little bit about Professor Stavans, who is one of the most capacious and expansive scholars and intellectuals working today. He is the Louis Sebring Professor in Latin American and Latino Culture at Amherst College. He's a renowned scholar of Latin American and Latino art and literature. He's a publisher, an art curator, the editor of several hugely important series about Jewish Latin America and U.S. Latino literature. He's also a translator who has translated some of the most important Latin American poetry and fiction into English. He's also himself a fiction writer and has written stories and memoirs about growing up Mexican and Jewish. His publications have won many prizes and put him on the New York Times bestseller list, which is really quite special for a scholar. And his pieces have appeared in countless publications in English and in Spanish. The New York Times, The New Yorker, Tikkun, The Jewish Quarterly, El País, La Jornada, Excelsior, El Universal, and many others. Professor Stavans has become a voice for the promotion and study of Yiddish in the US and Latin America, and also a promoter of Spanglish and of multilingualism. And perhaps more than any other living scholar, he's a translator and mediator between the worlds of Latino America, Anglo America, Latin America, and the Jewish Americas. So together, Professor Stavans and Professor Boyle have come together for this project of culinary midrash, as they say. Those of you who know the work of the great polymath Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz will know that this is not the first time that Mexican cooking has been used as a source of learning. Sor Juana likened the kitchen to a scientific laboratory, and in doing this, she elevated Mexican women's knowledge to a new level. So I'm really looking forward to learning from Ilan and Margaret about Mexican Jewish women and the traditions that they are honoring in this book. So please join me in welcoming them.
Go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, it is such a pleasure for us to get to be here with all of you this evening. Thank you so much for coming out and celebrating our book with us. I think we both love getting to come to the West Coast and enjoying especially the abundant produce that you have all year round. So thank you for having us. We want to do a little bit of storytelling tonight around how Sabor Judío came to be, and introduce you to the relationship between the two of us as scholars, the building of this book, and I also want to highlight our photographer, Ilan Rabchinsky, in a little bit. I'm going to be showing you some of the photographs that appear in the book, and we are so grateful that we are all Mexican Jews that were part of this team together. Ilan Rabchinsky is based in Mexico City. And I want to start this evening by showing you a photograph that appears a couple times in the book, if I can find our clicker.
Right here, Margaret.
Thank you so much. So if you have a copy of the book, you might actually just open it up. You'll see there's a couple versions of this image at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book. And this was an idea that our photographer had after we had spent some time together in Mexico City doing the food styling and photography for the book. We had a celebratory meal together at the home of Irma Krasov, who runs this incredible catering company, and many of her recipes are featured in the book. But what I think both of us love about this collection of images is that there's nothing staged about this photograph or the series that you see in the book, and if you look carefully, you see that things get messy. And that there's wine that's spilled on the table, and there are crumbs all over the place, and that it captures this unique moment in time when this group of people are around a table together, enjoying each other, enjoying a meal, conversing, and towards the end of the meal, practicing a concept that for me is the heart of the book, called sobremesa, which some of you may already be familiar with, but this idea that we are lingering and enjoying and talking to each other. So you'll see we'll be talking a lot about food tonight, but we're also going to be talking about the stories that we carry around and how we share them with each other.
Lingering, staying behind, being at the table, it's something that Jews like to do in Passover, in breaking the fast, and on Shabbat. And believe me, Mexicans like to do a lot. We can have a lunch that lasts 3 hours or 4, and the food comes in and out, but the stories also come in and out in all kinds of ways. Astonishingly, Jewish culture and Mexican culture have much in common. They have had much in common for many, many decades, many centuries. And it has been, in many ways, the result of the Jews who have settled in Mexico that have been able to bring together these two communities. Let me tell you how Margaret and I started this whole thing. We just had begun knowing each other. We both, obviously, as you heard, work in the same field. But at one point, with an invitation that Margaret very generously made to me to go to Bowdoin and give lecture, we talked about the fact that each of our respective families has a recipe book that has passed from one generation to the next. And it's a kind of treasure, a memory holder, an archive where the women have been able to communicate with each other over time. And Margaret probably will say something about hers, but let me tell you about the one that my mother, just before she passed, may she rest in peace, managed to digitize and sent to me on a PDF. And I saw it arrive, and because of the pain that she was going through, and because of the challenges of being the older son, couldn't quite pay attention to it. But when the whole cosmic tragedy of losing one's parent receded somewhat, I remembered that it was waiting for me, and I started studying it. And there's something absolutely Talmudic about this recipe book. It started with my great-grandmother in Poland. That part of my family is from Warsaw and the vicinities. And it for that reason, starts in Yiddish, but has Polish words. And it's about how to cook gefilte fish, or how to cook knedlach, or how to cook whatever they were cooking at that time. They pass it to my grandmother, who sees those recipes and crosses out certain things and says, this is not the way you cook it. You add this other ingredient. And so there is already a kind of midrashic approach of two rabbis communicating with each other, having an argument. And then it goes to my mother, and my mother passes it on to me. And the languages went from Yiddish and Polish to Spanish, and all kinds of Hebrew when it was needed. And there's crossouts, there is little doodles on the side, different ink. The beauty of this, a bit like Margaret was saying, is that it's messy. There are drops of wine. There is clearly something that has to do with where they bought it last time. And they put the price of how much buying the fish for the gefilte. And you can't believe that somebody would pay something like that. And it goes on like that. It's an absolute historical document that is in the family. And it made me immediately remember the fact that my Bobby Miriam, my mother's mother, would keep her refrigerator and her freezer with this new discovery, the Tupperwares, where she would put little notes when it was cooked, the ingredients were that they were cooked, who ate it the first time, how many more opportunities to, and you open the refrigerator and it's a museum. It's an authentic statement of what is the family all about in terms of dietary and a communal relationship with one another. So that document, I showed it to Margaret and said, this is something that goes farther than me. This is a statement of how these Jews have adapted themselves into various environments by fusing their own tastes according to generations and creating new Jewish food. The most exciting, because it was arriving to me, was the food that I would share with my kids. That was gefilte fish with salsa or with mango, or elements that were jicama salad, elements that were clearly very obvious of the ingredients that you would buy at the market, and that probably my great-grandmother would not even know how to spell in Polish.
So because we're talking a little bit about these family stories, I wanted us to each be able to talk about these protagonists that are at the center of our book. And so I'm starting with a photograph of Ilan's grandparents, and I actually just want you to be able to introduce them.
My parents.
Yeah, your parents.
Yeah, this is my father. This is my father and my mother in a black and white photograph. My father was a very prominent soap opera actor in Mexico who transitioned from Yiddish theater to Spanish language theater and then to television as well. And in many ways, many of the recipes that we had were recipes that were accompanied with the stories of my father telling us about having just filmed the most recent movie, or he was on the staff of Chespirito, which was a very famous sitcom in Mexico. And so to me, the memory goes hand in hand with the performative aspect of my father.
And so I want to introduce you to my family story. So Ilan was born in Mexico City. I mentioned that I grew up in Los Angeles, and I had the privilege of getting to spend a lot of time in Mexico visiting my extended family. So I have a couple photographs that'll help us walk a bit through the story. So the black and white photo is actually my mom there on the left, and it's a family meal that's actually really unusual because both sets of her grandparents are in this image. So next to her are my grandmother and great-grandfather, Malka and Elias. They both came from Poland to Mexico in the 1920s. Elias was one of the founders of the Centro Deportivo Israelita, which is like an enormous JCC in Mexico City. We think about how they were opening the community not just to Ashkenazi families, which was their story, but also to Sephardic families. And on the other side, you see my great-grandmother, Raquel, and her husband, David, and they had come from Lithuania to Mexico also in the 1920s. And so my mom, as a child, was moved by my grandparents to Los Angeles. And when she was in high school, she was such a rebellious kid that my grandfather sent her back to Mexico City to live with her grandparents, where she would, of course, be a real Jewish Mexican. And for that reason, she was incredibly close with Malka, and I was lucky enough that she was alive through my teenage years. So my mom and her and I would spend all of this time together. I didn't speak Spanish fluently growing up, and so I would go to her apartment and I would sit with her and watch a bunch of telenovelas and kind of understand the plot. And she and I would cook together, and we had these kind of fragmented conversations that are common in immigrant families. And for her, it was weaving together Yiddish and Spanish and English. She couldn't even pronounce my name, Margaret. She called me Marga. And so here you can see teenage Margaret. I'm at a farmer's market with her in Mexico City. I have all these vivid memories of her teaching me how to pick out papaya, how to haggle with people at the market. I remember one time her buying a live chicken and bringing it home. That scared me a little bit. And here, I don't know if we have any LA people in the room, so I had my bat mitzvah. This was the weekend of my bat mitzvah, and we were eating at a Jewish deli called Junior's. Do we have fans in the room? Doesn't exist anymore, but we have to remember it. And here, it's my great-grandmother, my grandfather, all of these Jewish Mexicans in LA eating Jewish food. And so to me, at the heart of the book is telling these stories, but also these conversations about, well, what really is Jewish food? What really is Mexican food? And we continue to ask and answer those questions. We want to talk a little bit about the organization of the book, too.
But let me say a few things about the Mexican Jews first.
Sure.
Though in the constellation of world Jewry today, Latin American Jews don't get the kind of recognition that we should. There are approximately 500,000 or probably 600,000 of us Latin American Jews in Latin America, and I'm not counting here the diasporas, the many Latin American Jews that as a result of the dirty war in Argentina or Chile or Uruguay or Brazil have moved elsewhere to the United States or to Spain or to other countries of Latin America. 500,000 Jews or 600,000 Jews, there are a series of ways of immigration that have defined Latin America as a somewhat welcoming space for them, but really not always that welcoming. The very first immigration, and I hesitate to call it immigration, is the one of conversos and new Christians and those that were hiding their Jewish identity because they were being persecuted by the Spanish Inquisition. And I am talking before 1492, during the expulsion, and shortly thereafter. Latin America, what became Latin America, it was a safe haven to those that were escaping the mighty fist of the Holy Office, and because the belief was that in the two centers where the Inquisition had its biggest offices, Mexico City, and at that time the country was called New Spain, and the other one was Lima in Peru, that mighty fist, that pervasive, pernicious approach would be less stringent, more peaceful than in other parts. Many of the conversos, those that had converted, arrived quietly to Latin America, and for 200 years, there was an entire generation of people who could trace their blood, and that was the whole debate of purity of blood or purity of ancestry, to an older Jewish past that was now hidden from others by having converted, sometimes honestly and authentically, and at others less so in a more hypocritical way. We all know, I think, the stories of conversos. New Mexico and Texas and Colorado also became magnets for the converso community that time. So calling this a Jewish immigration might be somewhat challenging because they themselves didn't want to be called Jewish. They arrived as refugees, or they arrived hiding their identity. But when you travel to different cemeteries, you see that in tombstones, there are, from these converso families, hidden stars of David, or lions, or Kabbalistic hands that show up in different ways, as if the conversos are passing the message from one generation to the next that they couldn't pass in their lifetime. When my grandmother on my father's side arrived at the beginning of the 20th century and kissed, and there's a mythical moment in my family, for the very first time, as a 17-year-old, she kissed my grandfather, who was coming from Ukraine, in the Alameda Central, which is a park that Diego Rivera painted in one of his famous murals. The photograph that shows up in those old cameras with a curtain behind is a blissful moment that will live to eternity. What they didn't notice, and they needed a scholar that would be in the family to find out, is that hidden in the past, in the background, there's a statement that says, Plaza del Quemadero, Plaza of the Burnings. And where they were kissing, these two Ashkenazi Jews, Yiddish speakers, was exactly the same place where some of those persecuted by the Inquisition were captured, imprisoned, tortured, and burned at the stake. It's an incredible, an astonishing coincidence of time, or maybe dissidence of time, that two Jewish immigrations coincide in the same place. They don't know about each other, and yet they share the same space. Just as the Ashkenazim are arriving to Mexico, there is also a very important Ottoman immigration of the falling Ottoman Empire in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Greece, Syria, and they are of Sephardic background. They practice Sephardic liturgy. And one of the most astonishing moments is to imagine parallel synagogues in downtown Mexico City where some are praying in Hebrew with a Yiddish accent and others are praying in Hebrew with a Ladino accent. And as time will go by, they will not want to mix. When I was growing up, I would be told that it's better to marry a shiksa than to marry a Sephardic because they are really primitive. And at the same time, the Sephardim were told the same way. Don't go with the Ashkenazim. They are abusive. They are neurotics. Who knows the type of future that you're going to have? 2 successive immigrations after that, the immigration of the Holocaust, refugees that come between 1939, 1945, some at moments where Mexico opened its doors, like other small number of countries in Latin America, when the United States was closing its doors for those that were seeking refuge. And the last one is the Israeli immigration that starts in the 1970s and goes on. The Israelis that come to seek fortune, that opened falafel joints and do all kinds of new businesses. So the Jewish immigration in Mexico is Spanish-speaking with the colonials and Sephardic and French, Ladino with the Ottomans, and Yiddish and Polish and Ukrainian and Russian and whatever other languages they were speaking, and then the German Jews that came during the Holocaust, and the Hebrew speakers that came. So truly multilingual. Last thing, Mexico is the 3rd largest concentration, the country with the 3rd largest concentration of Jews in Latin America, after the mammoth Argentina, which has the largest number, between roughly 220 to 250,000 Jews, mostly based in Buenos Aires and La Plata, and Brazil that comes second with 160 to 180. Ironically, Americans and Europeans might know more about Latin American Jews because of some of the efforts that we make as scholars and in movies than Latin American Jews knowing about each other. My parents, my grandparents, my nephews don't know much about Argentine Jews or Peruvian Jews or Colombian Jews, and the other way around works the same.
So I think you will notice as you're interacting with our book that Ilan and I cannot help that we are scholars. And so embedded in all of the recipes, we take the opportunity to teach a little bit of history. And there are these kind of mini essays that we weave throughout about immigration or about kosher or about chilies and the history.
Right.
And so that's been something beautiful about the genre of this book. And so I'm going to talk with you a little about the organization. We landed eventually on the collection having 100 recipes. Ilan started this story. So when I first started at Bowdoin, I'm part of a Jewish studies committee, and I lobbied very, very hard to bring the illustrious Ilan Stavans to campus, knowing that we were going
to work together one day and be at the Magnus Museum.
It was a prophecy, and we discovered this connection that we have with each other, and shortly, and the family recipes that we're both carrying around. And Ilan had this idea of us submitting a call to Diario Judío in Mexico City to ask other Mexican Jews to submit their recipes to us. And so we had a team of students at Bowdoin and a team of students at Amherst who helped us filter through all of these submissions and stories sent to us in a variety of languages, in Spanish and English and Yiddish. And then we landed on, okay, we want 100 recipes in this collection. How are we organizing it? We decided we wanted it to feel like you were eating and experiencing a day of food in Mexico. And that helped us
Just the recipes would not arrive solo, alone. They would arrive with the entire story about how the grandmother of the cook did this, or the mother did that. So it was an entire spiel.
that we got to filter through and tell the stories. And so you'll see alongside every recipe, we try to credit where did this come from, and in some cases, we got to play a little bit and put a few different family stories together. There are also, in the book, you'll see there are luminaries in the Jewish Mexican literary world who shared their recipes with us, and then we got to introduce you to their poetry or to their memoirs, or celebrity chefs like Patty Heenich, who I found out is a distant cousin of mine in researching this book, and it's evidence of why my great-grandmother was so amazing at cooking. So I'll start desayuno, our breakfast dishes. Here you might recognize it's a kind of shakshuka, Israeli, but it's inflected with chiles that are local to Mexican markets. And we, again, had many varieties that we were testing. Here we have a French toast made with challah, and it's topped with cajeta. When I'm in New England, I sometimes have to explain what cajeta is, but I have a feeling this audience knows. No? Okay. A delicious, delicious goat's milk caramel that you should go to the grocery store and buy immediately.
Right after this event.
And so it is great on the French toast, but also in coffee and ice cream.
Or just on its own.
Or on its own. So following our desayuno, our breakfast section, you get to comida, which is the lunch, but really it's the main meal of the day. Here we have an albóndigas, a meatball kind of soup. You see it's inflected again with local ingredients, the cilantro, the avocado. If you are looking to prepare main course kinds of dishes, you would go to the comida section of our book. The comida is typically at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It lasts forever, forever and ever if you are my children.
Yeah.
Are we still eating, they say. Whoop. And then we get to cena, the dinner, which is in the evening, lighter typically. Here we have a recipe that's gotten quite a bit of attention. Brisket tacos, if you have leftover brisket on your Rosh Hashanah table, this is an incredible use of it. Here's a fusion where Anat has prepared this incredible 3-chili marinade for the brisket. And then my grandmother always serves rhubarb with her brisket. I can't imagine eating brisket without rhubarb, and it also turns out it is fabulous on tacos.
And my wife cooks the best brisket, no discussion here. And she prepares tortas. Tortas are kind of sandwiches with the brisket that show up in the book. We try to be really balanced, but there are 2 brisket recipes in the book. We couldn't avoid that.
And there are 3 matzo ball soups.
Yes, that's right.
Then we get to sobremesa, which we've talked about, the lingering, but there you'll find our desserts, after dinner drinks. I think there are 2 or 3 babkas too. This is a Mexican chocolate babka that comes from my great-grandmother. This to me was another, there are so many gifts from this book, but I tell the story a lot of when Baba Malka would come to LA. She had a whole suitcase filled of her babkas that she would make and wrap in tinfoil to give to all of us in the family. And we tried for so much time to recreate her babka, and we could never get it right. And so I will also give a shout out to Leah Koenig, who is incredible in the Jewish food world. I adore her modern Jewish cooking, and she worked with us to help standardize some of the recipes in this book and figure out, especially the altitude differences around baking are pretty complicated.
Because one of the things that happens when you are putting a book together that is a kind of oral history of an entire community is that every recipe comes with, okay, you put a little bit of salt and a little bit of fish and a little bit of this, and what on earth is a little bit in all these different contexts? So we kind of normalized it or balanced it in a way that needed to be tested, contested, and retested until we figure out what the right balance would be.
At the very end of the book, there's a section called Fiestas Judías, Jewish holidays. There are kind of mini essays that describe the major holidays, how they're celebrated for Jewish Mexican families in Mexico, again, also in the diaspora. And you'll also see that there are suggested menus for each of the holidays too, which sometimes can be fun for your own planning. Latkes with mole is
Latkes with mole, you let me talk about this one.
Yeah.
Latkes with mole is the food that the Aztecs used to prepare when they, no, it's not. Latkes with mole is a concoction that started in the family. It has become, I live in Amherst, Massachusetts. It has become as legendary in Amherst as Emily Dickinson or Robert Frost. And you need to know how to prepare the latkes. You know, there are all kinds of ways to burn a latke in the wrong way. So it has to be crisp, but it has to be also, you have to taste the potato in the right way. And then you put mole on top. And there are different types of mole, but this is a particular kind that is with chocolate. And then you put applesauce and cream on the side. And I'll tell you, if the last Aztec emperors had tasted this, history might have been different. The Spaniards might not have succeeded in their effort.
Amazing. And I will say that my family now does have latkes with mole regularly. I'm converted. We also have a couple of paleta recipes. Some are kind of just standard fruit, refreshing. This one, Ilan and I like to fight about. The dark purple is a Manischewitz paleta.
It's the only good thing you can do with Manischewitz.
Okay, so I have a little question for everybody. Is anyone with me on Team Manischewitz? Oh, okay. So
all right.
I have time to convert you over time. So I just wanted to show you a couple of images that Ilan has already talked about, what it meant for us to receive some of these recipes that are handwritten. On your left is actually an image it's a letter that my great-grandmother Raquel was writing to her daughter Estela, who had just moved from Mexico to Brazil, and because she had gotten married. And so in the letter, and you can see it's mostly written in Spanish, but if you look kind of right in the middle, you might see another language. Anybody's eyes good enough for that? There's a little bit of Yiddish.
Yeah.
Right in the middle. So that's the language mixing that we're talking about. But what I like about the letter, too, is that it's the kind of standard worried Jewish mom, but then she's also embedding in the letter a recipe. And that's something that we're really interested in, that a recipe shows up in so many places, and it doesn't just have to be, again, on this side, you see kind of more standard format of a recipe with a title and instructions and a list of ingredients. What's lovely about recipes is that they show up everywhere. Something I like to talk about as a scholar of women's literature is that if we really want to celebrate the abundant amount of writing that we have from women across time, we need to be paying more attention to these historical recipes because they're all over the place. I think we're going to cook with you now.
You're going to start cooking while
Yeah. Let me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am cooking a dish that is inspired by your father.
Yeah.
Ilan's going to talk a little bit about his father, and then I'm going to walk you through making this dish.
We're doing something that the Food Channel will try to imitate.
And I think we can. You don't need. Do you need these images, or you want them for a minute?
No, I think this is enough. This is from Chespirito, which is one of the biggest. Chespirito was an icon in the 1960s and 70s that was produced in Mexico but watched all over Latin America. To this day, people will tell me that they remember my father and from Chespirito, and they will also say it will also bring to mind the fact that when we would walk in New York City, this is in the 80s and 90s, I would immediately know who speaks Spanish walking on the street because those Spanish speakers would identify with him and come and ask for an autograph or all kinds of things. I want to say something.
So why don't I'm going to start a little bit, and we take turns.
And I'll ask you questions. And,
okay. Yeah. So this is it's Abraham's lentil salad that you will find in the book. A lot of people have been asking us about vegetarian recipes. This is one that people have been saying is a favorite. It's very straightforward to make, which is what's fun about demoing it, because you can all leave today and definitely make this at home. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do is to dice the red onion, and I've already kind of pre-cut it. But what's interesting that we're going to do here in a minute is let the onion sit in a marinade. And what will happen when you do that is that it reduces the intensity of the flavor of the onion, and it's the acid from the lemons that will make it more palatable. So we'll just throw this marinade together. It's
Great.
just lemon juice, olive oil.
And I'll take this opportunity to mention we're asked repeatedly. Well, maybe before I mention that, aside from the organization of the book that Margaret was talking about, desayuno, comida, cena, wanting to bring readers to the cycles of the day and when people eat and how they eat with each other. There is also at the very end of the book the meals that Mexican Jews eat in the high holidays or in Shabbat or in other different holidays. Sometimes they repeat from other moments during the day, during the year, but for the most part they can be original and authentic only for Yom Kippur or only for Passover or what have you. And one of the questions we get often asked is about the kashrut, the kosher element. The book has a number of different recipes that are, in Jewish families, somebody's always complaining about, I can't eat this, and I'm allergic to that, and I'm vegetarian, or I'm gluten-free. So there's a whole variety in the book of how can you accommodate your different members in the family with different...
I like that he's saying different and not difficult.
Yeah, I'm saying different. But then there's also a section in the book that tells you about how Mexicans approach kashrut, the kosher. And yes.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. So you'll see we do not have measuring spoons. And so I'm using a teaspoon and a tablespoon and kind of roughly estimating the lemon juice
Like
and
my
olive.
grandmother used to do.
Exactly. And so I also want to give you all permission that part of this is obviously the recipe is there, but you can taste when a kind of simple marinade comes together.
So going back to what I was saying, Mexicans have kosher food, and there's kosher butchers in Mexico, in Guadalajara, Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, Cancun. Those are the 4 cities where the majority of Jews live today. We also have kosher style, and there has been in the last maybe 20 years a growth of the Orthodox community, modern Orthodox, and even more Orthodox than that. So there's Lubavitchers and there's Satmar and others that have arrived to Mexico. And so the communities are segregated by the dietary approaches that they have. And then we have also something called kosherísimo. It's a very Mexican approach. We all hope it's kosher, but it's so good in terms of being Jewish that if somebody asks you, is that a taco al pastor, generally made with pork, is that kosher? The answer has to be an enthusiastic, es kosherísimo. You're really going to become Jewish when you try this taco. And there's a whole nomenclature in the book of the different, where you can buy things, and how you cook them kosher or non-kosher, and so on. Back to you, Margaret.
Okay, so you see here that we have the red onion that's kind of marinating in this mixture of the olive oil, the lemon, salt, and pepper. I've pre-cut our cherry tomatoes. You're just having a pint of them. You have a bunch of parsley. It's a half cup, but again, like if you are a parsley lover, you might want to add more. You'll see that this is relatively simple, so it's important that you're choosy about your ingredients. And again, you all are so lucky in California. I've been waiting to cut into a California avocado. It's like the primary reason that I accepted this invitation. Gosh, these are so beautiful.
Avocado plays a major role in Jewish Mexican, oh my God, it's beautiful. In Jewish Mexican cuisine, and in Mexican cuisine in general, guacamole, etc. But it really comes from the Aztecs. This is no joke. It was the butter that the Aztecs used, avocado, aguacate is a Nahuatl word, that they would put almost on anything, especially made with corn.
So the core of this salad are lentils. This is also a friendly recipe because you can prepare the lentils ahead of time, as Dan generously did for us. You refrigerate them overnight, and then you could just, this is the core, and so you're gonna add it in with your onions and the marinade. You stir things up. And we'll add in.
You're supposed to put it under the table, as that's what they do in the Food Channel.
I think I would need like a team of like 12 assistants right here too. Your tomatoes, I'm going to add these guys in. Look how beautiful. Do we love parsley?
Now we do.
Now we do, yes. Okay, and you got these nicely mixed together. And I'm saving the avocado for the end because you know that if we overmix with the avocado, it will get mushy, end up all over the place. So you want to kind of do that dicing and then gently fold it into the salad. And you'd want to do that right before serving so it doesn't brown. But the acidity from the lemon will protect it for a bit. And again, there's a lot of flexibility, I think. Like if you are an avocado lover, add a little bit more.
And as you do the avocado, I want to conclude this part, and we're going to open it to the audience with the fact that if you are truly a reader, as we dreamed you would be, of this book, open it, read the recipes, cross out what you don't like, put little comments, complain that it wasn't done, it wasn't cooked enough, or state the date that you did it, who liked it and who didn't like it, and then just pass it on to the next generation. That will really make it a true Jewish cookbook.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are maybe going to... Esther, you want to come in, or? Sure. We're going to open it. Yes, I think we are going to. Gracias por esto, por hacer esto. Y gracias por la presentación tan hermosa. We're going to open it to the audience. Any thoughts that you have, any complaints, any recipes that you thought it should have been in the book, anything that crosses your mind. Please. Let's just wait for the microphone.
Is extra virgin olive oil a big deal in Mexico too?
The
EVOO?
Yes, that is the one that we use in Mexico. Yeah.
But look, this one is from California.
Yeah, this
Would you replace it with cilantro as opposed to parsley?
Yeah, absolutely. You could. In the book, there's a different recipe that is very cilantro. It's an herb salad where cilantro is the star. In honor of, does this taste like your childhood? Mm-hmm. So this was traditionally made with parsley, but definitely play.
Maybe I could ask a question. How many recipes are from fathers and grandfathers?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Ilan always says that it's only women that are in charge, which I appreciate. But there are fathers and grandfathers that show up in the book who are in the kitchen, and that's part of the story that we are telling.
Yeah. There are male protagonists in the. I would say still in the ratio would be probably, am I right? Like a third coming from our families, and then the rest coming from the Jewish community. It was an amazingly heartwarming response from the Jewish community, and it would really, truly wanted to make a kind of oral, ethnographic volume that spoke to the richness of the Mexican Jewish community. And some people sent one, some people sent 10, some people sent one, but they asked their daughters who lives in Chicago to send another one of the same version, and their other daughter that lives in Tel Aviv to send another version. And so you have the diasporic nature of Latin American Jews, Mexican Jews from all over.
Thank you both so much. These questions are just sort of, in a way they're mechanical, but I think they maybe help some of us understand sort of the nature of this cuisine in your project a little bit. So the first question is just, I mean, you both have these roots that are similar in both Mexico and connecting to Eastern Europe, if I understand correctly. And so do you understand this cuisine that you grew up with and a significant amount of the cuisine in Mexico for Jews as some kind of a fusion cuisine? I mean, do you see it as that, or is it sort of like a collection of recipes that came from Eastern Europe largely, but they were tinkered with, and then there's some people who grew up in Mexico, so they have more, Spanish Jewish cuisine? I'm just wondering how you understand that cuisine. And then the second question, which is really more mechanical, is, so you get 4 recipes from the same family, or you get 10 recipes that are similar. Did you guys do any combining of them, or you felt like that was some kind of a corruption and you kept them, sort of in their integral state?
Excellent, Ethan. Well, I can answer. You want to go ahead, Margaret?
No, go ahead.
Let me answer the first one. At the core of the book is really the question: what is Jewish food? How does Jewish food become Jewish when we're talking about diasporic people that absorb from the environment sometimes very traditional elements, say gefilte fish or kreplach or matzevols, that might originate in the community, but might come from the Polish side or the Belarusian side or the Hungarian side. And then once they come into the families, they become adapted and adopted and reconfigured. And in that sense, Mexican Jewish food is truly a fusion food, a food of many diasporas that have coincided in one territory, Mexico, that has been incredibly welcoming and is incredibly varied in its flavors. And Jews have distinguished themselves in innovating with those ingredients and with the ingredients that they brought along across the Atlantic or whatever ocean or land they were crossing, and creating something new that doesn't taste anymore as Polish alone or Syrian alone or Israeli alone, but it truly feels Mexican Jewish. And maybe the most interesting part here is that if we're talking about the conversos and the Ottomans and the Ashkenazim, this no longer is converso and Sephardic. It's Mexican Jewish. Mexican Ashkenazim are eating Sephardic food, and Sephardim are eating Ashkenazi food, and talk about encounters in that sense. I think it's a beautiful effort at maybe stealing from other cuisines, but creating something that is altogether new. No,
I think you're absolutely right. And what we're seeing is just how dynamic recipes are. And so much about these stories are people trying to remember or hang on to some taste that they've lost. And then the way that you adapt with what you do have access to. In this question, too, I find myself talking a lot about a dish, pescado a la veracruzana, which my California friends will recognize as like iconic on most Mexican menus, right? We think of it as a standard kind of dish, but if all of this Jewish immigration came through the port of Veracruz, I've been asking myself a lot, like, shouldn't we as Jews have an attachment to this place, and what would it mean for us to claim that recipe as Jewish?
And in regards to your second and maybe more provocative question, Ethan, I don't think, just as there isn't an innocent translator who just translates without an agenda, even though they might tell you that they do, there's no innocent chef. Chefs end up twisting things depending on what they like or they don't like or what they prefer or what the audience, the eaters, would ultimately want. So absolutely, we would get 5 versions of pescado a la veracruzana, but my father's would win. or I'm joking here, but we would find some kind of combination that didn't mess the product, but that enhanced the flavors. Oh, yes, this one has olives, and that other one didn't have olives. The olives clearly come from the Mediterranean, but they incorporated them. That's a nice combination here. And how you cook the tomato dependent. So there's a lot of like magical thinking that takes place in the ultimate concoction of the recipe. Yeah.
Okay, a question over here about, from the Sephardi point of view, over here.
Over here, sorry, I was just.
There we go. From the Sephardi point of view,
Sure.
I'm thinking of, so my family is Sephardi. They remember, to them, the recipes are coming straight back from Spain, which they're not, of course, but they are. And so I'm wondering how the Sephardi comes to my grandmother, to my nonna. What you have presented is, I'm quoting, from those Yiddish people.
Yeah.
And
You're quoting?
I'm quoting, yes, it's a quote. From those,
Oh,
she
sure,
didn't speak
yeah.
much English, but she
Yeah.
knew those Yiddish
Sure, yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So that is, to her, she would want to hear something about the authentic Ladino, authentic Sephardi communities, which may have mostly disappeared from Mexico and from Latin America. So could you talk a bit about that?
Oh, yes, wonderful.
Okay.
So I would say that because Ilan and I come from Ashkenazi families, it was really important to us to decenter our experiences too and do what we can to uplift Sephardic and Mizrahi stories. So at the top of my mind is Miriam Moscona, who's a poet and she writes in Ladino. She shared a recipe for tarator, which is a cucumber yogurt chilled soup that is part of her family story. There's kibbeh in the book. And so we looked for recipes that allowed us to talk about these historical moments.
There has been extraordinary research on the converso foods in Mexico. The food that Sor Juana would cook, for instance, she herself being a conversa, though not publicly acknowledging it. There is an incredible book called A Triple of Honey that is about the food that the conversos in Mexico would cook, fish, so that the neighbors would think that they are doing something on a particular day that would distract them from the actual food that they had already stored. There's a lot of research that went into the book of the food of medieval Jews of the time of Yehuda Levi and Shmuel Anagid and Moshe Ibn Ezra, the context of the convivencia and the Jews that traveled with them. There's recipes in the book. Some recipes are actually acknowledging some of the Yehuda Levi tradition that connects with the part of Spain that he was coming with. And we got messages from those Sephardim, I'm quoting myself here, that are telling us the stories of, particularly there's one beautiful case of longing for the food of Spain that was lost along the way. And Angelina Muñiz, a very dear friend of mine who grew up Catholic, but discovered that when she was a little girl, her mother would clean the kitchen and pile up all the dust and rubbish in the center. And then once it was all piled up, she would put it in a bag or in some kind of container and get it out through the window, not through the door. And she thought that this was something that all Christian families did, until she discovered that among conversos, you don't put rubbish on the threshold, on the door, because of the mezuzah, and put together the sacred and the profane. That led her to an exploration of her own converso Jewish past, and with this, the kind of food that she had been eating that she thought was from Spain, but actually was much more rearranged. And there are several recipes from Angelina in the book and others. So there's a very authentic and deliberate attempt to credit the extraordinary secret worlds in the cuisine and otherwise of conversos in Mexico.
Thank you. I'm over here.
Oh.
And you're starting to speak about my question as well, but I thought I'll still ask it. What did the selection process really look like? Like your academics, your scholars, as well as doing a cookbook, you received all of these hundreds of recipes, and what did it look like to make these choices? What did you leave behind? What did you sort of select? And was it trying to create a balance between sort of Sephardic and Ashkenazi and converso, and what is Mexican Jewish, or something else
Wonderful
sort of
question.
in the back of your mind?
Yeah, no, it's kind of fun for us to reminisce a little bit about the process because it was really complicated to sort through all of these submissions. I think it was helpful when we landed on this idea of meal times and then to know, okay, we have 100 recipes and we can really only have 20 breakfast dishes. And that made it easier to say, okay, we have enough in this category. We had so many sweets. I remember.
I can say something about that.
Yeah. And another thing that I'm reminded of with this question is also we received sometimes many versions of a recipe that we just decided didn't fit at all within the confines of the book. So for example, sushi cake was something that was sent to us, I think, at least 3 different times. There were different Jewish Mexican families that felt like that was part of their tradition. But it wasn't quite telling the story that we wanted to tell about.
And that, I think, it goes to the heart of the question that you're asking. As an anthologist, and an anthology to me is like the Bible, a portable library that people take with them that is made of mini books. An anthology is 2 books. All that the anthologist put in and all that the anthologist left out. That's the second book. The hope is that everything that went in forms a better book than everything that was left out. But really, what is not in this book is in the universe as a big book. And we were really hoping to create a book here that attests to the complexity of the Mexican Jewish community without annulling our biases altogether, recognizing our biases. I'll tell you, I have a very sweet tooth. And for me, anything that you eat in a meal is a preparation for the dessert. So there might be too big of a section of desserts in the book if you compare it to the time that people take to eat desserts in Mexico, Mexican Jews. But it's my book and I'm Margaret's book. Let somebody else do one without desserts. It's going to be a tasteless book, but it will be there. So I don't think you can altogether eliminate you. You shouldn't. You are an eater. You're a cook. You're involved in all this. You're a translator of and a transmitter of the culture. But you're also objective or hoping to be objective. And griot that brings together the many voices and channels them for others.
Do one more question.
And kaput.
And then we have a special coda.
Sure.
So muchas gracias. I just wanted to thank you both and the Magnus. My name is Ariela, and some of my family members are in this book. I lead Olamim. We work with Latin Jewish families here, and I just want to say that you've brought so much integrity, so much humor, and tenderness into this book that gives me a window back into where I come from and the recipes that I love. And I wanted to share my favorite page is page 132, Chelmelquitengo tacos. It is so hilarious that you did that to us as readers. To trick us into thinking this was an authentic recipe, although it might be. And I wanted to know what the story was behind that recipe, and just thank you so much for bringing us together here. Gracias.
Gracias a ti. Thank you.
Yeah, so I could just say that I think that's actually a perfect example of that the recipe is authentic in the sense that there are families that for Rosh Hashanah were preparing lamb tacos with pomegranate and honey, and we wanted to be able to share it, but we also wanted to be able to share a little bit of folklore. This is just one example, so like Sor Juana shows up in the book, Frida Kahlo shows up in the book, and that's us wanting to do this kind of educational piece of who are the icons in our community that we want you all to know about. But I'll let Ilan
if you know
say.
anything about Yiddish, you know that there's a town of fools called Helm that I think also lives in the Mexican Jewish imagination. It's called Hemelquitengo, and some delicious food has been cooked there, and that is one of them that shows up in the book. Friends, thank you very much. Margaret, you're the delight. Thank you for your hospitality.